everyone, and welcome to Functional Fertility, the podcast designed to demystify your hormones, up-level your lifestyle, and supercharge your fertility potential. I'm your host, Dr. Kalea Wattles, and today's episode is a great example of systems biology as we explore the connection between migraine headaches and fertility. I find so many connecting points between these systems when I'm doing a fertility assessment, so I'm really excited to welcome today's guest, Diane Ducarme. Diane is a contemporary master of the migraine investigation, blending Western science, Eastern medicine, and cutting-edge technology to unearth the root causes of migraines. Diane's dedication to migraines inspired her to create her podcast, Migraine Heroes, and her company, Nectar Health, leads the journey toward migraine relief and wellness. Welcome to the show, Diane.
Thank you so much, Kalea.
I find that migraines pop up in so many of my fertility patients. And so as I am working with them, I'm asking them to do some tracking for me and kind of plot their migraines with their cycles and their stress level and what they're eating. And I know that you have all of this expertise in the relationship between migraines and our cycle. And I wanted you to give our listeners an introduction to this topic and tell us how these things might be related.
Yes, absolutely, because they are. For many, they are. Not always, but for many. And so you've probably seen a couple of different patterns in your data, where you see some women will say, I always have migraines just before my menstruation, for example, which can be sort of a big classic, but not for everyone. So they will say, oh, I have lots of pre-menstruation symptoms, and one of those can be terrible migraines that will last for a couple of days. Some women might say, then I also have some migraines during my menstruation, and it can be like the first day, the second day, or every single day, or more towards the end of my menstruation when I start spotting. Some other women might say, I usually have them after my menstruation, and some might say, I have them around the ovulation, or all of the above. And in addition to that, they may also say, I can also feel that stress is quite a trigger for me, or alcohol, but kind of not always. When I think it's always my cycle, but sometimes a bit random. And when I look, it's random. I think it's alcohol, but it's also not always. Or some will say, it's completely unrelated, and they are daily, or they just appear in just really, really random ways. And so we see everything along the spectrum. But the amazing thing is when we're able to understand them, especially when they relate to cycle, but not only, but especially when they relate to cycle, and we can unlock the migraines, we can unlock a lot more natural fertility.
From your perspective and all of this data that you've looked at, is it helpful to track? I mean, does it help us to create a more precise treatment plan when we know when in the cycle the migraines are happening?
It's a great question. Yes, it is. Yes, it really does, because it allows to create transparency, but you need to look at it with a very open eye. Sometimes women will be asked to track, and they do that for quite a lot of years, but then they don't see the pattern being consistent, and they feel discouraged because then they feel, then it doesn't really help. But it still does, because once you can see the forest and the trees, you can start to plan your life much better and start to find solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll explain why. I mean, one of the things that really women will go away. They're told to track sometimes, even by their GP, by their neurologist, can be also, if they're very lucky, but their functional fertility doctor. And in which case it's very useful. But in the case of a doctor, sometimes they will track and they will say, it's cycle related. Then they come to the doctor's office and they look at the data together and they say, well, it's actually not cycle related. I don't see the pattern. Or the doctor will challenge, is there a pattern in the first place? Do you see it's not cycle related? But I thought it was. So intuitively they feel it is. But when they look at the data, it isn't systematically. And that will throw them off in their intuition. Yet their intuition is super, super, super important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in all things, in migraines, in fertility in general, in medicine in general,
Completely.
intuition.
Completely. There, like we know so little. I mean, shame on us in the West. We know so little about the female body that women get gaslit at a super high speed, and will their intuition will be really challenged in ways that are completely unfair and usually wrong. Yeah. So I
Mm-hmm.
can give you a few examples. For example, you can have a woman who's going to place a migraine IUD, and initially the migraine IUD doesn't give her migraines, but over the years it does, and she feels it's the root cause. Um, uh, but then she leaves it for a couple of years, and the doctor is kind of reluctant to remove it because they say no, it's not the migraine IUD. And then there's a bit of a domino effect that happens from so initially she's going to put it, she might feel good, she doesn't bleed anymore, but over the years she might starts to be more bloated, she starts to have numbness in the arms, numbness in the legs, tingling sensations. She might have sore joints. She starts to have a terrible posture. She puts on a bit of weight. She's a bit moody. She has more symptoms with these, this absence of menstruation. And there's a bit of a domino effect going on in her body. And by the time the doctor agrees to remove it and she removes it, she still has migraines, but now that are coming from somewhere else. And the doctor might say, see, I told you it was not the migraine IUD, but she was right. And so really listening to one's intuition is really important. Really important. I give you another example. Lots of women who are going to be put on a lot of preventative medication and medication for an acute attack. They're going to feel, the more I take them, the more, I don't know, I start to have the stomach uncomfortable and acidity. And sometimes I throw up, but I feel part of what I throw up are the medications. And I think they help me in some way, but in some way they make everything worse. And again, it's not going to be backed necessarily by science, but they're right that it just continuously messes up their system and their fertility in the process.
Mm-hmm. Which is why I think you've highlighted the importance of a very careful history collection, really understanding not just someone's labs and their biomarkers, but their lived experience and zoning in on that intuition piece. And as we think
Yeah.
about some of the root causes of migraines, it seems like for some there's a hormonal picture. It seems like maybe there's an inflammatory component, and some others, based on what you've said. Are there some other common root causes that you're finding in women specifically?
Yes, absolutely. So when you look at the different systems, it's a bit like the following. What is really interesting, and let me start maybe with that, is migraines are genetic. And because they're genetic, it's 5% of boys and girls. And we understand that in the West. It's like 5% of boys and girls have migraines. And after all, it's genetic, so it's normal that it's quote unquote fair. But as of puberty, the incidence for women is going to triple to quadruple, leaving 18% of women with migraines. And Western science is going to be very puzzled because they will say, well, purely hormonal migraines do not account for the 13% difference. It can't justify the whole 13% difference. But what happens if you look at it from a functional perspective, the woman goes from being a girl to being a woman. And so in the equation of fertility, what's going to happen is that she's going to start to be able to give life to a baby. If we compare her to a man is going to have daily cycles with one sex hormone and is going to produce one cell in that equation. But the woman is going to produce the whole baby, the brain, the hair, the nails, the heart, the blood, the eyes. It's a very sophisticated. So if you had to compare the female factory and the men and men to a factory, men's factory would be quite a simple factory, maybe an envelope factory. And the woman would be a very sophisticated factory, maybe a car factory. So the ability from puberty that something goes wrong with the system is much higher. If you had a dashboard with buttons to troubleshoot problems, the dashboard of the woman would be a lot more sophisticated because the system can produce material. It can produce a child. Also in her fertility years, she's going to lose 23 to 28 liters of menstruation. So it can also produce blood. Okay. The man's body is not wired like that. And so when she goes through puberty, the incidence is going to triple to quadruple because the system comes out in its all complexity. And so when we look at migraines, we have to then look at the system. What systems are changing in her body? And the first system that changes really has to do with the liver. And I speak 7 languages, and it's almost I only speak 2. I speak West, and in West, when you say liver, you always designate the piece of flesh at the bottom of your right rib cage, always. But when you say liver in Eastern medicine, or in Mandarin specifically, you don't mean that. You mean the liver system, the liver function, okay? And in that liver function, you have the liver, the gallbladder, all of the female hormones, all of the mood hormones, all of the tendons, ability to detox, the eyes, a lot of the brain, the temples, the top of the brain, the eyebrows. And so whenever that system will be challenged or not doing well, the brain's going to complain. And I think we in the West, we describe migraines as, it's 18% of women having a genetic neurological disorder. And that's we have to be careful with the words we choose. Maybe neurological disorder is like, oh, Mother Nature decided to make a fifth of women cuckoo. Why? Oh, let's spice it up. Is that plausible? Or does that not make sense? Like, I think we have to ask the question, really, does that really make sense? And a fifth of women who are producing 100% of the people's planet are just neurologically disabled. No, that doesn't quite make sense. In the past, women with migraines, they would be able to predict weather changes. They would be able to protect society from bad foods, test foods to protect the tribe, to protect the people, because they were a lot more intuitive than others. And so the migraine is more of a tool here, a massive tool for fertility. Because if I manage to conquer my migraines, I manage to conquer my fertility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that beautiful liver system that is going to be in charge of my hormones is also incredibly related to my brain. And we know that from the gut-brain axis. We know that from a vagus nerve perspective. And so the more the woman's going to feel, the more my liver organ is inflamed. The more it has inflammation, the more I took maybe wine, cheese, chocolate at a wrong time of the cycle, the more my brain's going to be inflamed and the more I'm going to have migraines. But not always, because sometimes my liver system is on top of its game. And then I can have these foods and I can feel absolutely fine. So this is part of the beautiful mysteries of femininity and the beautiful mysteries of the cycle that we continue to explore and love so dearly.
Yeah, this is fascinating. And I already know I have been underestimating the impact of liver health on migraines. I just have no one talks about it like you've just shared with
Yeah.
us. And related to our liver health and our detoxification abilities, if we think about kind of our assimilation area of our body systems, is the gut health. And you mentioned the gut-brain axis. And I talk about the relationship between gut health and fertility so much that I wanted to spend a few moments here and get your insight on this connection between gut health and migraines.
Yeah, because it's huge. So it's only in the last 15 years in the West, and I talk a lot about West and East. In the last 15 years in the West, that we discovered the gut-brain axis and how the brain gives instruction to the gut, which always we thought, but then it turns out that the gut also gives instructions to the brain. Yeah, and we discovered that quite recently. Now, in Eastern medicine, this has been known for thousands of years. It was always a part of it. So if you discuss with a really old traditional Chinese medicine doctor and you say, oh, we have this cutting edge science on the gut-brain axis, they're like, oh, probably, darling, you haven't understood really well what they meant on TV or on the news. And you're like, no, this is what they mean. And it's like, oh, no, but we've done that for a while. Okay, really? Like, seriously? Like, where are you coming from? Of course it's connected. How could it not be? Just look at an animal. Take a bee. And you can say, oh, no, the brain of the bee is disconnected from the thorax of the bee. That doesn't make any sense. So if you look at your body, of course, it's a system, it's a circuit. Your brain is not a starting point, it's also an end point. And so the gut-brain axis is completely connected. Now, what's defined the gut, as you rightfully say, has to do with everything from the mouth to the end of the food chain and all of the hormones within. And so all of that's really, really completely intertwined. And so the more my gut overall, all of my systems and my thoughts are going to be happy, the more my brain's going to be happy. So oftentimes women, when they have a lot of migraines or when they have a lot of fertility issues, they might be very fixated on these things because this is the most loud symptom of all, the symptom of not being able to reproduce. And I like to call it a delayed fertility, just not being able to reproduce yet because the body is just not yet where it needs to be. Or the massive pain that they experience in their brain. But there's just so much more that is going in, and so I encourage women to pay attention to the other symptoms, like, oh, if you feel bloated, if you have numbness, if you feel dizzy. Do you feel dizzy when you stand up fast? Are you sensitive to light? Can you stay in front of a screen long? Do you sweat a lot? Do you sweat easily? Do you sweat at night? Do you have gray hair when you're so young and so pretty and you should be in age of fertility? Are you tired easily? And so all of these symptoms are a reflection of imbalances inside the gut that once solved can solve for the migraines as well, and the fertility too. Those two come hand in hand. One is a tool to read the other one.
Mm-hmm. And do you find, let's say a woman is struggling with migraines and maybe her fertility as well, and she has dysbiosis or she has intestinal hyperpermeability or leaky gut. Do you find that when we address those issues in the gut, the migraines improve?
Oh, the migraines completely decrease in intensity and frequency, disappear, and the woman gets pregnant. Like that's the shift is completely instantaneous. I have seen so many women. You really, they have that extra radar that almost the other ones don't have. So if when you do your work, like you have all of the analysis, for you to help the woman get pregnant, the woman who has migraines has that additional thermometer, additional barometer to give you and say, no, it's not fixed yet. As long as the migraines are there, it means there's something missing. Now, if the woman has less, she might just get pregnant before it completely finishes because the body might say, hey, you know what? Good enough. We're doing great. We have everything we need. Let's do this. I'll give you an example. For example, leaky gut, I find really interesting. In the language in the West, when we say gut and we say it's leaky, we almost blame the gut for being leaky. Yeah, we say the gut is being leaky. When actually, it might be that at the top of her gut, at the top of her food chain, there's the stomach spleen. The stomach spleen is in charge, a bit like a gatekeeper, to triage the food coming in and take from Mother Nature the very things that are going to be able to form the baby and form a mum and form blood and form amniotic fluid. And that police officer is going to triage that food and give it at the disposition of the mother. He's also in charge of making the skin really firm and the muscles very firm. And so we love this guy. He's the one that if you have a good one, your body stays in amazing shape. And when we're pregnant, we have the stomach spleen changing role. And he's going to not just feed mom, he's going to also feed the placenta. Now, when the stomach spleen, for some historical reasons or some imbalances, is not doing a good job, he's going to send all of the food untriaged to the gut, untriaged to the small intestine, who's going to go, mayday, mayday. There are things I want. There are things that I don't want. Oh my God, throw this out, throw this out. It still has toxins, still has parasites or allergens, and also has the good stuff. And so it may go into a gut that's completely leaky and runny, or into a mix of constipation and sort of very loose stool, and get completely confused and all over the place. And once that's the case, it also means that the body is unable to produce the placenta and might say, hey, you know what? I'm out of this project of baby thing. We can't do it. Like, we're going to need for 9 months, I'm going to need to feed 2 of you. And currently the reality is I struggle to feed 1 of you. I don't want to go ahead. Regardless you do IVF, I'm not ready. And so the moment you repair that, the body has the dysbiosis resume, the leaky gut resume, and then the body's like, now we can work. And so when the body says no, listen to it. Listen to it. And one thing I find really, really difficult is for a couple when the woman goes through a miscarriage because the body says, hey, I didn't say I was ready. I'm not ready. We can't do this. There's not enough blood volume. There's not enough liquid for the amniotic fluids. We can't feed the placenta. I'm not, there's no game on. I can't do this. I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to stop this project together. And for the dad, there's no life yet because there's no baby in their arms yet. I have a husband and we have 2 children. And I remember when we came back from the hospital, it's so weird to come back 3 of us. And I thought, oh my God, we left 3 of us. Have you not seen the size of my belly? But for him, it only hit him when he saw the baby. And for me, the day I took a pregnancy test, I was pregnant. But for him, I was only pregnant the day he heard the heartbeat. And these things only become tangible for men much later. He also became a dad. I mean, he's an exceptional dad. But it comes gradually. For women, for us, we become a mom the day that test is positive, in love with our child and in love with its soul and in love with its presence immediately. And when the body says no, and the woman has to go back on abandoning that child, it's really hard. And there's a lot of grief and it's really, really hard. So my encouragement is always try to fix the migraines completely and first, and then the fertility will follow, because otherwise you have miscarriages, and when you have miscarriages, you will carry that grief for your whole life, which is really difficult grief and completely unnecessary, and also unequally distributed in the couple because it's going to be your grief, not his grief.
Mm. Beautifully spoken. And this is something I see in my real patient population, those who have a history of migraines and also have a history of pregnancy loss. And that was actually my next question is, it makes sense to me that we use the migraine as a red flag that there's something else going on with inflammation, with hormones, with our mitochondrial function or whatnot. From your perspective, and I think you answered this, but I'll just kind of summarize it again. Do you advise that we have complete resolution of the migraines before trying to conceive again, or is a decrease in frequency or intensity enough? It's so hard to plan the timeline, and I would love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, I would get rid of them completely. If you get rid of them completely and you do that beautifully with foods, you will also have a pregnancy without migraines.
Mm-hmm.
And that means a pregnancy without medication. It also means you have a pre-pregnancy without medication. And now we know how the impact of medication on pregnancy is. So we realized recently that even Tylenol in pregnancy, which if you Google it, and I love Google, I find a really good trusted source, will still tell you that Tylenol is okay during pregnancy. But if you go in the fine reading of the latest clinical trials, they say it's actually not okay. It damages the liver and it's going to create a much higher likelihood of having ADHD in the child. We don't understand all of these things. Like if you can't have alcohol because it has toxins, what makes us think that having medication in pregnancy is safe? In fact, if we are where we are today, it all dates back to, I don't know if you're familiar with that story, into the 60s, where a lot of women who were pregnant were having nausea. In order to treat their nausea, a doctor came up with a medication called thalidomide. And as a result of that medication, there were 10,000 children in Germany alone that were born without limbs, so lacking full arm, full leg. It's only if you speak with elderly people, they might say, oh, I know such a person. Awful. Can you imagine you're a mom? And because you were trying to have a bit of comfort, then that comes up. And it was a traumatic event for everyone. It was completely traumatizing. And it's because of that that we start to remove women from clinical trials, because we aimed well. We thought, oh my God, maybe she's not pregnant, but then she becomes pregnant. Maybe she's not pregnant because she doesn't know she's pregnant. And so even if it's one in the whole clinical trial, this is just, this is a life. We can't do that. And so for very protective and well-intended reasons, women will remove from clinical trial. And so I find that imbalances in the child you don't see them immediately. They might come later in life, like ADHD, like children that struggle to focus, struggle to fall asleep, have sort of difficulties at school, breathing issues. Like you can usually sometimes trace it back to how the pregnancy was held. So if you can demedicate in that beautiful fertility phase, and then have a beautiful organic pregnancy, then life is just much, much easier beyond.
Mhm. This is maybe true for a few different conditions. I talk about this all the time, that a very thoughtful and intentional preconception planning time where we work to reduce migraines and chronic inflammation and even your GI symptoms is ultimately reducing the risk for chronic disease maybe 20 years later, maybe through the generations. And so it's such a beautiful opportunity to do these things for our full body wellness, knowing it will impact our pregnancy. So I appreciate your insight there.
Completely, and I'm 100% with you, and that's why I was so excited, because our values and our beliefs like completely aligned, and completely aligned. It's very, very true. In Eastern medicine, in traditional Chinese medicine, and in Ayurveda, which arguably sort of cracked something about fertility, something along the lines, right? They did quite well. Now, it doesn't mean that it's easy to manage a large population, but they did manage to be quite fertile for quite a number of years, thanks to their medicine, which was completely specialized into women and not necessarily into men. And yes, and so the more you solve for that, the more they say the vitality of the baby is a reflection of the vitality of the parents at conception. So they say the more the health of the parents at conception, almost the better the DNA. That's what they've expressed. That's what they've experienced. I don't think we can prove that scientifically yet, but empirically, that's what they've observed. And so their whole obsession was like, if we do that for a couple of generations, then we all have sort of stronger human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reverse is true a little bit when you look at our generation of children and our generation in the world. You know, are we getting sort of healthier and healthier generations, or more anxious generation, more generations with cancer, more generations with ADHD, etc. And of course, technology plays a role in there, but not just technology, also the way we feed ourselves, the way we treat our bodies, the way we mute signals with medication.
Mm-hmm. I know one of the ways that you're really interested in and have an expertise in supporting that vitality is with nutrition, is with superfoods. And you mentioned that
Yes.
there are certain foods that can help us to treat our migraines. And
Yeah.
some of these, we'll see what you reveal, but I imagine some of them are very antioxidant rich and anti-inflammatory and can help with other body systems as well. Will you talk us through maybe your top 5 superfoods?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with 700 foods, and I find that nature has, everything it needs to produce a beautiful baby. And it's all about finding, okay, what are the imbalances? So whenever I meet someone, there's usually a number of layers of imbalances, and I need to unpeel them like an onion. And I find that going and unpeeling the onion in the right order is really, really important. Um, um, and so there are some foods that are going to help to do that. And there are some foods that are also going to hinder that. And this is where I want to start, because I know that this is actually more universal. Is there are some foods that look superfoods, but that will get you a miscarriage really early on. And I want to share that because some women might feel, I'm pregnant, and then I have sort of a delayed menstruation, and I never got that really, really positive pregnancy test, but I swear I was pregnant. And they're right. Again, their intuition is completely right. And one of those foods that will give you that aspect is, for example, turmeric. Turmeric has a great reputation and really deserves it. It's a beautiful food that, in case of a number of diseases, is going to help, is anti-inflammatory, etc., etc. But there's 2 buts. One is turmeric is going to clean the blood. When you are freshly pregnant, you don't want to clean the blood. It's too late. Like, it has to be cleaned before. Once you're pregnant, you want to not touch the blood. You want to respect it. And so imagine your temple of love, your uterus. When you have that beautiful baby, you don't want to start cleaning the uterus while the baby is there growing. You don't want to do that. And if you do that, it will result in an imbalance significant enough in the uterus that the baby will fall. Yeah, and so I really want to attract that, because oftentimes we will talk about a food in absolute terms. And I think it's a big mistake that we do in the West. We will talk about a food such as if it was only doing the good stuff, and we're going to celebrate what they do good. We don't celebrate what their dark force. So you need to think, for every door you push, from the other side you pull. Yeah. And so you want to understand the pulling as well as the pushing. I'm getting something. What am I giving up? And in the case of turmeric, it's that balance of the uterus and the blood. There's another one, which again is loaded for its anti-inflammatory properties, is ginger. Ginger will make the blood circulate faster. And so if you have a ginger infusion when you're pregnant, freshly pregnant, you can lose your baby. The other thing is ginger is really warm in nature. So it may take some of the yin, some of the liquids that will constitute the amniotic fluid. And so they're not welcome. Now, that being said, a ginger infusion or decoction is very different to candied ginger that you can chew if you have morning sickness. Very different things. So the morning sickness one makes sense. You chew it, you don't necessarily swallow it, you just chew it, and that's gonna, help you, remove very naturally and very softly the nausea. But ginger that you drink might shift that balance, make the blood circulate too fast, and therefore, you losing the baby. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yep. So just a quick question. I know probably some people are using either turmeric or ginger for their anti-inflammatory action. Is it something where perhaps they could take through ovulation and then they discontinue so that the second half of their cycle and early pregnancy is safe?
Exactly. Absolutely. Yes, that's a big yes. Yes, absolutely. That's the way to do it. And it's great to, so for example, if you've had a lot of miscarriages, it's really nice to clean the uterus after all of these miscarriages. And so turmeric can help with that. And so that's exactly what you do. You do that in that follicular phase. And then once you hit ovulation, you stop it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely.
Are there a few other foods that you find to be very powerful to help migraines that might also benefit fertility in some way?
Yeah, absolutely. And always go, if you try some of these foods, always try them and then see how you react, because I don't know you, and every person has their unique traits. But for example, goji berries, they have 5 roles they can play. They will stimulate your liver and detox it, which are 2 very different roles, and both are equally important. When you stimulate the liver, you say, "Dear liver system, you're a bit behind on your homework. Here's more energy," and you can choose whatever you think is important to do on your to-do list. And it may be detox, but it may be also hormones or tendons or something else. Third, it's going to nourish the kidney system, which is also super important in ovulation. It's going to increase the yin, so these beautiful liquids that make the woman very wet and very hydrated from inside. And it's going to increase the blood volume. So that's a beautiful food. Now, because it's so beautiful, because it's so rich, you really need a really small proportion. So you can just put, 8 to 10 in cup of water, hot water, let them infuse and drink that. And that's enough for the day. Your body, there's always a magic number to every food. So for example, if you say 1 apple a day keeps the doctor away, great. What about 5 apples a day? Well, what would that do? You can imagine in your brain, it's like, I'm going to have 5 apples a day every single day for 20 days. You can almost have already stomach cramps. So it's the same with these really small and potent food. More is not more. There's a happy portion that is better to have daily than a massive amount, to have in one go.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to make our infusion with our goji berries. Do we eat them afterwards, after they've been soaking?
You can, if they've soaked for a really long time, they're likely going to be a bit like mushy and not very good in taste. So you don't have to. If you don't like waste, then you eat them. They will always add more, but you don't have to. Yeah. What is really interesting is when you take an infusion, you bypass the gastric juices, and so all of these nutrients go directly into the bloodstream, which is really nice. So if you have, for example, a leaky gut, you can still access some of that beautiful food that way. which is nice because you need it. You really, really, really need it. If you have a leaky gut, it needs to be repaired. But meanwhile, you still need to go by the day. And however, 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 and I have to say these things, it's really important. Goji berries do contain fructan. So if you have an IBS, like a full-blown irritable bowel syndrome, and you're on a FODMAP diet, no goji berries. If the goji berries make you bloated, stop them immediately. They don't suit you. Do you see? That's what I mean by, I find sometimes in the West we have a very black and white vision for food, but the reality has these small nuances that are important, and you don't have to know them. I think as long as you follow your intuition, then you can also just trust your intuition. You don't, in absence of knowing everything intellectually.
Yeah, it's funny, just as an aside, as a related note, I do a lot of GI testing in my practice, and sometimes people will come in and they'll say, every time I eat avocado, I feel nauseous. I don't feel well. Or every time I eat, an olive oil. And then we do their GI testing and we find that they're really having a hard time digesting fat. And it's great that we see it on the report, but I'll say, you already knew. You already
Mm-hmm.
had the intuition that these foods weren't working well for your body. And of course, now we have some specificity and we know how to support you so that you can enjoy those foods, but listening to those signals that you're getting every day is so important.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And what is really hard sometimes is because the signals can change. And I maybe what I want to talk about that a little bit too is if you think of a man next to you, like he wakes up and every single day he has one sex hormone and his liver does the same thing and his body does the same thing. It's quite simple. If you're a woman, you have all of that cycle, and so in that cycle, some days the liver system is going to produce estrogen, some days LH, some days progesterone, some days detox from a medication, some days detox from a bit of alcohol. Some days have a big to-do list, some days have a smaller to-do list, some days be able to go through it, and some days not. And this is where women will feel that their intuition is not reliable because they feel, yeah, I'm intuitive, but it's also inconsistent. Some days yes, and some days no. And so I'm not sure. And I think you can still follow your intuition. If some days no, then pause that for a little bit, just park it on the side and then reintroduce it just gently, just sort of gentle movement. Now, obviously, I make it sound simple. Obviously, we both know it's a lot more complicated, but in absence of support, you can always rely on yourself first.
Mm-hmm. Before we move on from talking about the liver, I should have dedicated a whole episode just to this. I mean, this is so
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. But before we move on, there are some things I do in my practice to support the health of our liver, things like castor oil packs. Can
Mm-hmm.
these
Mm-hmm.
can
Mm-hmm.
these modalities fit into
Mm-hmm.
a migraine
Mm-hmm.
treatment plan as well? It just occurred to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. They will take a lot of toxins out of the liver system, and so that's going to relieve a certain types of migraines. For example, premenstruation migraine would be a really good one, like when the toxins in the liver are responsible for parts of those migraines specifically. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
Right. My
yeah,
wheels are turning, all of the things that we can do.
yeah.
I wanted just to explore quickly another area with you because I saw you posted on social media about the impact of migraines on relationships. And this is something that
Mm-hmm.
I've seen in my practice, but I don't think I was appreciating because a lot of my patients are already on a fertility journey, which has its own implications on
Yeah.
the relationship. And then you add this layer of migraines. And I just wanted to get some advice from you on what we can do to support couples who might be navigating fertility struggles and have this added layer of migraines and how that might influence their communication dynamics.
Oh, yeah, this is such a big topic. And let's talk about the relationship to the spouse. We can also talk about the relationship to the parents and to the siblings, which also can be difficult in those two endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
For the spouse, look, because migraines are genetic and empathy is the ability to relate to what the others feel. So if you take your spouse, when you say you have a migraine, the closest thing they can relate to is a headache. And even if you say a migraine is not a headache, it's not a sentence they can really process. So I've done a whole podcast on this topic, a quick one, because I don't think, spas have that much time for migraines, but, a 15 minutes podcast on migraine here was just to explain to them what is a migraine and, why it's so hard to relate to. And I find the best analogy we can find is like a hangover that's going to last for 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 days and will not move with any medication. And there you're quite close to it. For a woman, you could think labor. Labor might be, some people argue their migraine attacks are harsher than labor itself. And so I try to first calibrate the pain we're dealing with. And that's really important. And it's maybe sometimes hard to convey yourself because it means you're advocating for yourself, which feels, I don't know, maybe hard to do or hard to believe. And so first of all, it's like breaking the myth dialogue, maybe with a couple of facting, because it's genetic, you can't feel it. Because you can't feel it, it's hard to relate. So, these are the two best proxies that, you can have in terms of pain. Then there's the fact that men always want to jump to a solution, usually, often. I was on, with a person yesterday, a woman, and she was mentioning that in the past, her boyfriends were commenting on her migraines and sometimes giving her random solutions or saying, there's something you must be doing wrong. And both receiving advice and being told there's something that you must be doing wrong is a really hard sentence to receive. I also presume that in your practice, this is also what women are told sometimes. There must be something, or this must be something we are doing wrong, which like there's a royal we, kind of you having most of the job with that baby. And it's really, really hard. And I think just, having distance with it, like he didn't mean it that way. Like it's really offensive, but he didn't mean that way. And I think as women, taking a lot of distance vis-a-vis, what our partners can actually understand. And finding maybe more a duo in someone like you or me. And I don't mean that in a very commercial way at all. It's just that the help you need is they can't give you what you need. Like they don't even understand the problem to start with. So it's really hard for them to relate. And I also find that, and that's a very personal experience, I find men, they like to think that the baby comes from the bird. They want to know that they're fertile. They don't want to have their virility sort of touched. And so it must be you. You must do something wrong. Please don't tell me I don't have what it takes. It kind of, because they're not used to it. So as we grow up as teenagers, as women, we get knocked off, by our menstruation. And we have to seek for help really, really early in our lives because our bodies just make these unusual things. And because before the machine works really, really well, it comes with a lot of challenges. So we're used to asking for help. Men are not, everything normally rolls until they're 40, 44, everything's rolling. And so they're not used to asking for help. And so I find as a woman, you have in that toolkit, that modesty, that seeking for help, that intuition, that motherhood, that sisterhood, and leverage that to have them being your duo to transition all of that and have the baby come from the bird very naturally and very gracefully if you can, because it's really hard in a couple and can lead to a lot of deaf dialogue and things that are said that one would regret without ill intending. It's really, it can put unreasonable pressure on both. Yeah.
Right. So
Does that make
kind of
sense?
yeah, it makes perfect sense how our romantic relationship or our partnership can
Yeah.
change. You mentioned that there may be different dynamics with parents or siblings. Will you tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, and actually, I want to also mention, I've also heard some people mention that their spouse was also their migraine carer. And so they had a role as a spouse and almost as a male nurse or a nurse. Yeah. And so they had to make the distinction between when am I your nurse, deciding when do I take you to the emergency room because you're in so much pain you can't decide for yourself anymore, and certainly not drive yourself to the emergency room because maybe you've lost your vision. And when are we a couple? And people are expressing how difficult these two roles are. Men are also having expressed a sense of guilt that they have because they want to help, but they cannot help. So for them, it's also they find themselves in a situation that they're very unfamiliar with, where there's a problem and it's a massive problem, and I love you, and yet I can't do anything for you. Um, and so I've heard from people sometimes seeking therapy for that, to divide these roles and be able to live in harmony. Although still better to demigraine and get fertile. But it's I found it really, really interesting and very powerful. And so I just want to mention that. Now back to your question on parents and siblings. I'm sorry. I find parents look, sometimes they will have migraines themselves, in which case they have a lot of empathy. And that's great. Parents have that unconditional love. Parents can also be the providers for someone who suffers from migraines and therefore suffers so much they can't work and they can't live by themselves, so they might live with their parents, in which case they might feel fertility clock is ticking away, that maybe it's never an option for them. And so it creates a lot of distress in the child. It also creates a lot of distress and guilt in the parent. And so I find that's a beautiful relationship of unconditional love. Sometimes you can have a parent that is so difficult that it's the cause of the migraines and sort of child abuse, etc. That's also possible. But overall, it's usually a relationship of love. And then you have the siblings, and the siblings, um, they are maybe a little bit harder. Sometimes, not always. That's because they don't relate and they feel they're the same because they have the same parents. And maybe they have a few headaches because maybe they inherited the gene, but a very slight version of the gene. And so they compare their pain to their siblings' pain. And that will put quite a lot of tension because they will say, oh, my sister, all she talks about is her migraines. And then they roll their eyes, or she doesn't show up to family events. And when I come across such siblings, which has happened quite a bit in the past because I explain to what I do, and then they ask a lot of questions, and then they talk about their family member. And I take the time to listen to acknowledge their frustration, because they're usually just frustrated. It's like, oh, we used to be, spending so much time together, and now just all of us, almost like such as if you had a new relationship with your migraines, so good you didn't want to leave it. Like the conversation is almost absurd. And then I reframe it. I'm like, well, probably, if I may, your sibling suffers probably about 10 times as much as they actually express. They probably hide that they suffer because they really learn to hide it away. And when it's Christmas and they can't come, well, they probably feel extremely sad. So just you can't solve it. They will figure it out. They're smart. But meanwhile, just have just genuine empathy. Again, it's genetic. If you can't relate to it, imagine labor, imagine a massive hangover, because that's the best you can. And so just be kind. Just be kind. Just be kind. It's difficult for them.
Yeah, so difficult. And there's so many layers. It's the pain and the grief and the all kinds of emotional turmoil that's related. So just be kind. I think that's a great takeaway for us. And Diane, I just know everyone who's listening will want to learn more. And I know you have so many resources that are available for those who'd like to learn more about their migraines. Will you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Yes, so you can go on the website mynectarhealth.com, and there you'll find a test. You can take the test, and the test is going to ask you 97 questions around your migraines, but also all of the other stuff going on in your body. And in itself, it's going to be quite an eye opener because usually people will just focus on the migraine. There's just so much else going on. And then from there, we can meet and talk about your migraines and their root causes. And then the other thing is, I have a podcast called Migraine Heroes, where I have lots of women that are coming to testify. And I think after I've worked with them, they have two emotions. One is an emotion of gratitude. Think, oh my God, after 2 decades of migraines, oh, heaven. And then another emotion, I'm going to call it the really emotion, like really, I went through 2 decades for that. That's so absurd. And so they come, they're not paid, they just come because they say, well, I can hope it just serves other people because it's been a nightmare for me. And I'm just so grateful that there was an exit to all of this. So, yeah.
Well, we'll have all of those resources available so that if anyone is struggling with migraines as they're tuning into this show to work on their fertility, they know that there is a solution and they don't have to have that really moment, or maybe
Yeah,
they will, but at least they'll get to that
yeah,
moment where they have this relief.
yeah. And I find, like I find it's beautiful to do functional fertility and to really listen to the signals and listen to, when you do your work, your beautiful work, you bring, a lot of children in the world, a lot of children, that come so naturally and in respect with nature and alignment and love of their parents and just, just as a human beings, the way we're wired to do. And migraines is one of these many symptoms that help us decode, okay, where is the problem? And so listen to that. Don't mute it. Listen to it.
Listen to your intuition. Thank you so much to our listeners who choose to tune into this show and trust us on your fertility journey. To our show's producer, Paola Martini, thank you so much for making this show a possibility. And Diane, thank you so much for your time and your insights today. It's just been a pleasure to chat with you.
Thank you so much, Kalea, and thank you for the beautiful work and energy that you bring into this world.
We'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you love this episode and want to hear more? Head over to drkaleawattles.com/podcast where you can find more episodes on all things fertility.